Courage and honor, cousin.
Into the fires of battle, onto the anvil of war.
Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I'm Zekthar.
And I'm Yuxin.
And we are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires, and this month we'll be discussing the guys that started it all, the Word Bearers.
That's right, Zekthar, and this week we'll be starting with the father of the heresy, ecclesiarchy, and downfall of the Imperium, one Lorgar Aurelian.
Right you are, Yuxin. Before we get into it, don't forget, folks, that we will be dropping the second part of our 3 parts on Bilko's Brigade, live on May 19th, where our strange crew enters the Octarius sector.
Quite right, Zekthar. And this time, hopefully, we can fix the audio. But getting back to Lorgar, well, last time we left off, we had just finished talking about, first off, his being raised by Cor Pharaon on Colchis, him taking over Colchis, having the Emperor show up and him revering the Emperor as a god, even though the Emperor said, "No, I'm not." Then continuing to worship him as a god till the point where the Emperor didn't like the fact that he was, to the point that he actually decided to stop it because he wasn't getting enough work done. Let's just put it that way.
Right.
He wasn't conquering quick enough because he's spreading something that the Emperor didn't want him to spread. So he decided, let's just burn down probably the most iconic thing that they love, and then psychically make you all bend the knee and say that I do not have godlike powers.
Yeah. And that place, anyways, that he burnt to the ground was Monarchia.
Right.
Now, after the raising of Monarchia, the history of the 17th Legion divides. One is the history of the Legion that the Imperium believes existed for solar decades after. The history of the Legion pulling itself from the pit of the past and embracing its true calling, a false history. The second is a shadow history, the true history that hid behind the mask of seeming loyalty. This true history can never be known, and what Imperial scholars do know of it are only distorted glimpses. Now, on the surface, Lorgar's response to the Emperor's censure was to withdraw. For a time, his legion seems to have played little part in the Great Crusade. When they returned to action, it was clear that they were a changed force. Whereas before they lingered after conquest, now they drove forward. For better or for worse, worlds burned, civilizations were made to kneel, and a trail of swift conquest and imperial compliance action stretched behind them like a bloody cloak. It is said that the Emperor was pleased that his son had understood his error and would, in time, become what he had been destined to be. To every other eye, the word bearers seemed possessed by a penitent fury and grim resolve to burn the past. All were deceived, though.
You think the Emperor was that foolish?
No, but we'll get to that here in a minute. Instead of seeing the error of his ways and doing a complete 180, Lorgar was shaken by the shattering of his universe. His ideals, morality, and actions were now proven to be a lie. One must wonder what anyone would do if they were forced by their god to see this. And what would you do next? At the time, some thought that the 17th Legion had withdrawn in shame, and that its return to the Great Crusade was fueled by a wish to atone. Such a kind of reading of events no longer rings true. Instead, it seems likely that Lorgar's fall began after Monarchia, that the dark powers of the warp reached out to him in his moment of doubt and offered him that which the Emperor had denied him, a higher power to believe in. It is not known whom these voices were that counseled him, and the hands that guided him to damnation. Again, much remains hidden, but a number of candidates seem likely, like Cor Pharaon, Lorgar's surrogate father on Colchis and close advisor, and perhaps even everybody's favorite, Chaplain Erebus. Both were steeped in the old faith of Colchis, a faith that was likely tainted by the four major powers of the warp long before Lorgar fell from the sky. The word pilgrimage is also one of the few fragments that has emerged as linked with that time, though its precise significance can now only be guessed at. What cannot now be doubted is that the word bearers who rejoined the Great Crusade after the raising of Monarchia no longer served the Emperor, but Lorgar into damnation. For over 40 years, the 17th Legion wore a false face of loyalty and planted the seeds that would eventually bloom into a galaxy-spanning civil war. The precise nature of their preparation is only open to supposition, but much can be deduced from Lorgar's character and the atrocities that would come later. First, it seems likely that the word bearers' renewed energy in the Great Crusade was a cover for its rapid growth and size, as well as the seeding of its new corrupted creed and belief in chaos onto new worlds. It must also have been during this time that the 17th Legion was cleansed of dissent, the last of the old iconoclasts and imperial heralds, the few Terran-born Astartes still among the Legion, and those who would not embrace the new faith must have been put quietly to the sword. The corruption of much of the apparatus of the Imperium also must have occurred in this time. It was that when Horus finally fell to the temptations of the ruinous powers, Lorgar had already long prepared the ground for the civil war that was to come. Now, many in the Imperium have planned and journeyed across the stars as a sign of divine faith in the Emperor of Mankind, to prove their loyalty and obtain a higher calling. In fact, Mr. Webster would say a pilgrimage is a journey of a pilgrim, especially one to a shrine or a sacred place. This was not the case with Lorgar. His journey was to discover if such a place even existed. Now, prompted by the first Captain Corps Pharaon and Erebus, both secret devotees of the Chaos Gods from Colchis' old faith, Lorgar journeyed with his Word-Bearers Legion's chapter of the Serrated Suns to what was then the fringes of the known Imperial space as part of the 1301st Expeditionary Fleet of the Great Crusade. At this time, Lorgar had not yet fallen to the corruption of chaos, though he had turned against the Emperor of Mankind as a deity no longer worthy of his worship. In short, his father broke his heart, and he was off to find someone else to sing praises to. You see, Lorgar believed that the Emperor was wrong to condemn mankind's natural instinct, to seek out the divine as an unworthy superstition, and he intended to discover if there were truly deities worthy of humanity's respect. To this end, the Lorgar no longer had any love or loyalty for the Emperor. He and his 17th Legion rejoined the Great Crusade, but did so only so their efforts could serve as a front for their pursuit of the pilgrimage. The word-bearers were also accompanied on this pilgrimage by 5 members of the Legio Custodes, who had been sent by the Emperor to watch over everything the word-bearers did to prevent them from falling back into the error once more. Now, like I said, while the Emperor was pleased with his son's apparent turn of thought, he wasn't an idiot and left some Custodes to keep an eye on him and report back.
Yes, and they did a fantastic job. Sorry.
The word-bearers' pursuit of any scrap of information that could be found on the primordial truth or the nature of the place where the gods and mortals could mingle ultimately led the 1301st Expeditionary Fleet to the Cadia system, near the largest permanent warp storm in the galaxy, later known to the Imperium as the Eye of Terror. The Expeditionary Fleet's master of astropaths advised Lorgar that unusual voices in the warp were heard in the vicinity of the Great Warp Rift, voices that spoke directly to the Primarch as well, which were the voices of the chaos entities within the Immaterium. It would be in the Cadia system that Lorgar would learn that his suspicions had been correct, and that the shape of all the religions across the galaxy that possess so many similarities to the Caucasian old faith were not artifacts of mankind's collective unconsciousness, but expressions of worship in the universal truth that was chaos. The decision was made to hold orbit over Cadia and for the 1301st Fleet's elements to make planetfall on the unknown world, designated as 1301-12. The landing force was comprised of Imperial Army, word-bearers, the Legio Custodes, and Legio Cybernetica elements. The landing party, led by Lorgar, was greeted by a large number of barbaric human tribes. Tribes described as dressed in rags and wielding spears tipped in flint blades, yet they showed little fear. Most notably for those fans of the Cadians were the barbarians' purple eyes, which reflected the color of the Eye of Terror itself in the spectrum of visible light. Despite the custodian Vendetha's protests and requests to execute the heathens, the word bearers approached the natives. A strange woman emerged from the crowd and addressed the Primarch directly, calling him Lorgar Aurelian and welcoming him to Cadia. This woman, the Chaos Priestess Ingethel, would ultimately lead the Primarch down a path of spiritual enlightenment that actually marked the beginning of Lorgar's fall to heresy and chaos. Later, the Priestess Ingethel of Cadia would initiate a ritual that would see her transformed into the demon prince known as Ingethel the Ascended, and then lead the 1301st Fleet Scout Vessel, or Ferrio's Lament, into the Eye of Terror. Now, within the Eye of Terror, the Serrated Sun chapter of the Word Bearers Legion witnessed the failure of the ancient Eldari Empire firsthand in the form of the Crone Worlds that had been scoured of all life that littered the Eye's region of space. Ingethel, of course, lied to the word bearers about how the Chaos God Slaanesh had truly been born and warned that the Eldari had failed as a species and suffered the fall because at the moment of their ascension, they were unable to accept the primordial truth, aka the worship of chaos. They gave birth to a god of pleasure, that they had felt no joy at her coming. Their new god, Slaanesh, had awoken to consciousness in the 29th millennium to find its worshippers abandoning it out of ignorance and fear. And from the Prince of Pleasure's grief was born the endless storm of the Great Eye, an echo of the birth screams of the Eldari's new and rejected god. The nature of the primordial truth was revealed to the word bearers in the ashes of the Eldari Empire, and Ingethel warned them that in order for humanity as a species to survive, they must not commit the same sins as the Eldar did, and must instead accept the worship of chaos. The surviving Space Marines of the Word Bearers Serrated Sun chapter eventually returned to Cadia and related to Lorgar all that had happened and all that they had learned within the Eye, the plane where mortals and gods could meet. These Astartes had been changed forever by their experience, for they had all become fusions of mortal and demon while within the Eye, and came to form a new unit of word bearers known as the Gall Vorbak. Following the visits into the Eye of Terror, Lorgar ordered the cyclonic torpedo bombardment of Cadia, wiping out the Cadians and leaving the planet abandoned so that no others could stumble upon the secret of the primordial truth that had been entrusted to him alone by the Chaos Gods.
However, the planet's extremely strategic location meant that it would prove useful to the Imperium, and the 32nd Millennium Imperial colonists were dispatched to resettle the world, becoming the ancestors of the present population of Cadians.
Quite right, Yuxin. And then, in the 41st millennium, Abaddon blows it up. But, yes, but Lorgar's enlightenment was not yet done. Having heard the report of what the Astartes of the Word Bearers chapter of the Serrated Sun had experienced within the Eye, Lorgar was determined to meet the gods of the primordial truth himself. 43 Terran years before the Dropsite massacre on Esfand 5, Lorgar took flight on a Stormbird gunship into the Eye and stepped onto the surface of the Crone world of Shanrathia, located within what would one day become known as the Eye of Terror. He was accompanied in his search by the demonic guide Ingethel, the Ascended. The creature inquired why the Primarch had chosen this world to investigate. Lorgar replied that he had seen the ruins from orbit, a city drowned in the rust-red dust plains that reminded him of the surface of Mars. The Primarch wanted to know what kind of creature Ingethel was, to which the Demon Prince replied that Lorgar knew what she was. But to Lorgar's psychically attuned eyes, he could see nothing in the core of the creature's being, a creature incarnated without a soul. Ingethel explained, in the realm of flesh, sentient life was born and souled. In the realm of raw thought, the immaterial, all life was soulless. Both were alive, the born and the never-born, on both sides of reality, and were destined for symbiosis and union if the Chaos Gods had their way.
So, don't you find it kind of interesting how Ingathel is a she, yet considered a demon prince?
Probably a follower of Slaanesh. Kind of seems to be his gig or her gig, depending on which way you look at
Their
it.
gig.
Yeah, their gig. It's gig. There you go. Well, okay. Yeah. Is Demon Prince actually supposed to be masculine as opposed to feminine? Or is it just a
Prince
title?
is generally masculine.
I mean,
And-
Prince normally is. I understand that, anyways. But I'm just saying, anyways, when it comes to like demons, is it really actually? Is there actually a feminine and a masculine version of it, or is it just because it's a demon, it doesn't really matter? Because technically, Slaanesh is known as a chaos god, but his title or her title is "She Who Thirsts."
But it's seen as a male or a female. So, yeah. Plus, you don't say
Maybe all demons are hermaphrodites. I don't know.
the
I don't really want to get too far into that conversation either.
yeah,
but
one of the gods you're using plural, it's generally masculine. Kind of like, the Roman gods. They don't say the Roman gods and goddesses.
right.
They say the Roman gods.
Oh, okay, I understand that, but
Oh,
at the
yeah.
same time, anyways, when Slaanesh is brought up, anyways, one of the titles is "She Who Thirsts," not "He Who
Yeah.
Thirsts." So, yeah, something
And then
interesting,
the
anyways.
Prince of Lust, and then
Thank you for bringing that up. But, anyways, Ingathel informed Lorgar that he was unique amongst the Anathema's sons, for all of his brothers were whole. Only he was lost, for his brothers had mastered their gifts since birth. Lorgar's own mastery would only come with understanding, but when it did, he would have the strength to reshape entire worlds on a whim. Lorgar then inquired as to what was the name of the world that they now stood upon. Ingathel told him that the Soul Broken,
aka the Eldari,
thank you, called it Yakrasa before the fall. After the birth of Slaanesh, it was named Shanrathia, which in the Eldari lexicon meant never forget. Ingathel explained to Lorgar the reason the Eldari were called the Soul Broken amongst the servants of Chaos had to do with the birth of the Lord of Pleasure. In her genesis, brought about... See, this is where it's going to get really confusing. We're talking about one God here. Just bear with me. In her genesis, brought about by the Eldari's worship, she claimed the spirits of the entire race. When any mortal dies, its spirit drifts into the warp. But when the Eldari die, they are pulled right into the maw of the goddess they betrayed. She thirsts for them, for they are her children. She drinks their souls into herself as they die. Lorgar commented that what Ingathel mentioned matched the teachings of the old faith of Colchis, for it was said that upon death, the unshackled souls drifted into the infinite, to be judged by the thirsting gods. Ingathel replied that primordial truth was deeply embedded in humanity's blood. All of mankind knew innately that something awaited them after death. The faithful, the loyal, would be judged kindly and reside in the gods' domains within the realm of chaos, while the faithless, the unbelievers, would drift throughout the ether, serving as prey for the neverborn. Though the Immaterium represented the heaven promised in most human faiths across history, it was also the same hell humanity had always feared. As the demon guide and the Primarch moved on with their exploration, they came upon vast ruins. These ruins were not the remains of a city, but the remnants of the craft world Zulasa, which had attempted to flee the birth of Slaanesh, but escaped too late and fell from the void to bury itself in the world's lifeless dust. 200,000 souls within the craft world had died at the moment of Slaanesh's birth. Unguided, with madness rampant in its own living infinity circuit core as the Prince of Pleasure devoured its souls, the craft world had fallen. Investigating further, Lorgar sensed something within the ruins. As he inspected the ruins of the massive spacecraft with his psychic probing, he felt something stir beneath, burrowing upward. And what first appeared to the shocked Primarch as a statue of a dying god that dragged itself from the grave of the scarlet soil. Agathel informed Lorgar that it was an avatar of Cain, the former war god of the Eldari. Agathel wanted Lorgar to understand the abject lesson that even a divine being could fall, intimating that the same could happen to Lorgar's god emperor and any gods that sought to deny or oppose the primordial truth. Almost pitying the pathetic creature, Lorgar strode forth and raised his Crozius mace, and then struck the creature, ending its painful existence. Lorgar then demanded to know what the future held. The demon informed the Primarch that it would end as it had begun, in war. Undaunted, Lorgar ordered the demon to show him. The Arisen found himself suddenly transported before the Eternity Gate, located within the Emperor's Imperial Palace on Terra. There was the ultimate barrier that was the portal to the Emperor's innermost sanctum, where the Emperor kept his personal genetic laboratory sealed away from his sons and servants. Agathel refused to explain how they had been transported through space and time to appear there. Some truths could not be contained by the mortal mind. She instructed Lorgar to look upon his surroundings with an immortal sight. Shocked by the sudden revelation, Lorgar was granted a vision of the siege of Terra. The Primarch was surrounded by thousands of phantasmal Astartes, fighting and dying at his feet. Foremost in the thick of the fighting were the yellow-armored Astartes of Rogel Dorn's Imperial Fist Legion. They fought fiercely against an entire legion unknown to Lorgar, clad in cardinal red. Lorgar finally recognized the crimson-clad Astartes for who they were, his own word-bearers. Their slight gray battle plate replaced by power armor the color of fresh blood. Agathel informed the Primarch that was correct. Lorgar's old colors had been cast aside to herald the changes taking hold of humanity. They were no longer the bearers of the Emperor's word. They were the bearers of Lorgar's. Lorgar continued to look on, witnessing a larger-than-normal Astartes transform in the midst of battle into a gargantuan demon-possessed Astartes. In this demonic form, it appeared quite powerful and was significantly larger and taller than the Primarch. The vision shows the demonically possessed Astartes going on a bloody rampage through the ranks of the Imperial Fist Squad before finally dying at the hands of the Primarch Sanguinius at the threshold of the Eternity Gate. In disbelief, Agathel informed Lorgar that this champion was none other than his most blessed son, Argal Tal, and that this was how he was going to die.
Zekdar, I don't think that's actually how he died.
It wasn't, but since you interrupted me again, why don't you tell the fine folks what did happen to him?
Sure, Argal Tal took part in the massacre upon Angron's homeworld of Nuceria, when the World Eater's Primarch sought to purge his hated homeworld of all life. Enraged by the lies that had been told about him over the last century, that he had abandoned his fellow gladiators out of cowardice on the day they had all been slain, Angron ordered his legion and the supporting Vakrajal to kill everyone in the capital city of Deshia, the masters of which had once claimed to own him. Then they were to wipe out every other living thing on the cursed planet. Argal Tal eagerly took part in this slaughter, but at the height of this bloody campaign, the World Eaters and Word-Bearers were confronted by the wrathful Ultramarines Legion, led by the Primarch Rabute Gilman. Argal Tal was ultimately betrayed by the Word-Bearers' first chaplain, Erebus. You know, that wonderful person, who viciously stabbed the Crimson Lord in the back with his Athang dagger.
Of course he did. It's Erebus. That's all he does. Stab people in the back.
But getting back to Lorgar.
Right. Where was I? No. Yes. As Lorgar attempted to step forward into the vision, he suddenly found himself upon a nameless world. He had seen all that he needed to see. Enraged, Lorgar snarled and declared he was tired of being led around by the nose into the demon's prepared lessons. Agathel warned the Primarch to watch his tone when addressing one of the gods chosen. Lorgar replied that he was only there by his own choice and that he would leave there by his own virtue. Composing himself, Lorgar knew that he was here to learn the truth of the gods, and that Ingethel was there to show it to him. He wanted to know why he had been summoned there, and why he had been shaped since birth to be brought to this place. Ingethel replied that Lorgar had been summoned because his life had been engineered to ensure this moment happened. He was here, now, because the gods wished it. In the tangled skeins of time's web, Ingethel had seen innumerable possible futures, where Lorgar had never come to them. But Lorgar wanted to know why he was brought here. Why not his brother Horus or Gilliman? They were the generals that he would never be. Why not Sanguinius or Rogaldorn? Why not Magnus? Especially Magnus, for he was the most powerful of all the Primarchs, without a shadow of a doubt.
Careful, brother. Sangi fanboys might try to get us.
Ingethel replied that the Crimson King was already a servant of the Chaos Gods, whether he admitted it or not. He came to the ruinous powers without needing to be summoned, and without ever considering the notion of faith. He came for power, because that was why all things of flesh came to the powers of chaos. And in 5 short solar decades, when the galaxy began to burn, Magnus would come to the Eye of Terror himself. With this revelation, Ingethel revealed one final vision, more than 40 Terran years in the future. With a gesture, Lorgar found himself staring at an uneven skyline that he knew instantly, for he had studied there for almost a solar decade, living amongst its people and coming to adore them as almost as much as he loved the people of Colchis. He was in the silver city of Tisca, the capital of the Thousand Suns' homeworld of Prospero. Upon further inspection, Lorgar saw the utter devastation: cracked spires, broken pyramids, shattered glass, and fallen city walls turned into so much rubble. Lorgar inquired as to the cause of the madness that he beheld. Ingethel informed the Primarch that Tisca would burn in the crucible of the upcoming war. Lorgar swore that he would not allow it, but Ingethel warned him that it must, for this was to be the final incident in Magnus's illumination. She then lied and said he would be betrayed by the Emperor, by his brothers, and he would bring his city to the warp in order to escape final destruction. Within the Eye of Terror, he would forge a bastion for the war to come. A war Lorgar would begin, but never lead. The war to bring all the truths of chaos to the Imperium. Lorgar had come to find the gods. He had found them, as they had always intended. Their eyes were now turned towards mankind. The Chaos Gods had said to Argotol, as they had said now to Lorgar, humanity must embrace the truths of divine reality, or suffer the same fate as the Eldari. With resolute clarity, Lorgar realized that the Chaos Gods sought a symbiosis with life, a conjoining of the ensouled and the neverborn in natural harmony. The gods needed humanity, for they could not claim the material realm without them. Their power was strangled when there were none to offer prayers or deeds in worship. This was why the spread of the Emperor's atheistic imperial truth presented such a terrible threat to them. Lorgar felt the Chaos Gods had chosen poorly. He was pleased and proud to have discerned the primordial truth, feeling honored to be chosen by beings powerful enough to be considered divine by the truest meaning of the word. But he would struggle to bring their light to humanity. He would not win a war against the living god that sat upon the Terran throne. Ingethel informed Lorgar that he would strive, and eventually he would succeed. Lorgar retorted that he only possessed 100,000 warriors, far too few to make planetfall upon Terra and overthrow the Emperor. Ingethel told Lorgar that in the future he would attract more faithful followers, as he liberated world after world. It was foretold that after he sailed away from the Eye of Terror, his legion would no longer spend years crafting perfect worlds, venerating the anathema as the god emperor. He would crush resistance beneath his armored boots and draw fresh, faithful humans into his service. Some would be slaves in the bowels of the word-bearers' warships. Others would be Lorgar's flock, to shepherd them towards enlightenment. Many more would be taken into the ranks of the word-bearers and bred into new Astares. Uneasy with these revealed truths, Lorgar asked again why he had been chosen as the god's champion. Ingethel replied that it had to be him. Each of the other legions would die for their Primarchs and lay down their lives for the Imperium. But the Imperium was the cancer killing the human species. Even when some of Lorgar's brothers turned against the Emperor, they would fight to command the Imperium. Only the word-bearers would selflessly die for truth and for humanity itself. Faith and steel must now be joined. If humanity became an empire instead of a species, it would fall to alien claws and the wrath of the Chaos Gods. It was the way of things. What had happened before to the Eldari would happen again. Lorgar then found himself again more than 40 standard years in the future, mere solar days after something humanity would come to call the Fall Prospero. Magnus had fallen victim to his own arrogance and now resided in the tallest tower of his broken city on a new world prepared for him within the Eye of Terror by the Changer of Ways, lamenting the destruction of his legion and the death of his hopes. He intended only the best, but his curiosity saw him damned in the eyes of the Emperor. He looked too deep, too long, into ideals the Emperor did not hold. Lorgar informed Ingethel that he would speak to the Crimson King, but the demon warned the Primarch that he would not be allowed to stand before Magnus. Heedless of his guide's warnings, Lorgar made his way towards Magnus's tower. As the Arisen ascended to the top of the tower and finally looked upon his brother, Lorgar reconciled logic with emotion. For though he looked upon the face of Magnus was solar decades older. In 40 years, the Crimson King had aged more than 100. Magnus was not surprised by his brother's presence, for the world in which he now resided held endless surprises. He wondered what incarnated hallucination he was addressing this time. Magnus thought his fellow Primarch was a poor simulation of the true Lorgar, for his eyes did not burn with the fire of faith. Only he and his sons understood. Nor did he bear the same scars. Lorgar tried to explain to Magnus that he was no mere apparition, for he was truly his brother on the final night of his pilgrimage. Growing weary of the encounter, Magnus banished Lorgar from his new realm with a thought.
What do you think would have happened if he had listened to Lorgar instead of banishing him?
That would, I think, would have been fairly interesting. But what do you think?
If he had had a serious conversation, it may have changed how Lorgar did anything in the future. It's like, right, I was screwed over by the demons and then the Emperor, right? Huh? Yeah.
That, and I think also would have drastically changed anyways how Magnus thought of his situation at the time.
You mean after the burning of Prospero?
Yeah, I mean, would it have changed Magnus's fate a whole lot? I don't know. At that point, I mean, the die might have already been cast.
At that point,
he might have gone too far.
Yeah.
Or maybe he thought anyways, maybe if he'd actually talked with Lorgar long enough, he could have gone, aha, this is a way that I actually can change my fate. Because technically, in Lorgar's time period, none of this has taken place.
Yeah.
Time warping foolery.
Yeah.
It's taking place. I don't know. I think it would have been interesting if they'd actually had a conversation more than just Magnus going, go away.
Plus, if it was mere days after, another aspect could be that maybe he would have tried to have gone and killed the Emperor later.
Right. Like I said, anyways, I think anyways, if he actually had a conversation and realized that Lorgar really was Lorgar instead of just some weird hallucination. Because by this point, anyways, I'm sure he'd been visited by all of his brothers. They were just not really his brothers, kind of thing. This one just happened to be one. So I think anyways.
This is the worst one I've seen so far. It's the most unrealistic out of all the ones that have shown up so far. Just go away.
Not only that, but why are you showing me Lorgar? I hate that guy. Excuse me. I'm right here. No, you're not. But anyways. Next, Lorgar once again found himself on Shanrathia. When he picked himself up from the sand, he saw that his demonic guide, Ingethel, appeared to be dying. The demon had used its already diminishing strength to rescue Lorgar from the sorcery of Magnus. Lorgar wanted to know why his brother would not speak to him. Ingethel informed him that Magnus was a tool of Zinch, the Changer of Ways. Magnus was a creature of his own ignorance. He believed that he was the manipulator. Sounds very much like somebody else, anyways, that we're talking about right now.
This moment.
At this very moment, yes. Some of humanity's leaders could be lured to the service of chaos gods by offers of ambition and dominance, while others, like Magnus, had to be manipulated until they were ready to witness and accept the truth. Lorgar, she's literally telling him what she's doing to him. Yeah. Anyways, Lorgar, though, did inquire as to which kind of leader he was. Engethel told the Primarch that he was the chosen of the Pantheon, for he alone had come to chaos out of idealism, for the betterment of his species. In this, as in all things, he was selfless. Convinced by the demon's prescient vision, Lorgar demanded to know his fate in the true war for mankind's future yet to come. Engethel told Lorgar that once the betrayal broke across the galaxy, there were countless moments in which he might meet his end. Some were likelier than others. The demon warned Lorgar that no being may know its future written out before it. Yet, on a world named Shrike, if Lorgar interceded in an argument between Magnus the Red and Lehman Russ, there was a concordance of possibility that he would be slain in their duel. If he ever drew a weapon against his brother Korax in a battle he could never win, then he would almost certainly die. Pushing aside information about choices he would not have to make for many years to come, Lorgar asked why they had returned to the dead world. The dying Engethel explained that she did not intend for it to be so, for the demon had used up the last of its powers, dragging Lorgar from Magnus's chamber with crude force, not guile. It was not her intention to show this world again. Something else had returned them there, something powerful. It appeared one of the Chaos Gods desired to test Lorgar's worthiness to serve as the mortal champion of chaos. Engethel chided Lorgar for believing that the chosen of the Pantheon might be allowed to leave the realm of the gods without first passing their tests. It had been decided that the Chaos Gods would collectively choose one representative to pass judgment upon the Primarch's worthiness to serve them. Yet the Chaos Gods were ultimately fickle beings, and one of the gods broke the agreement that all four had made, wishing to test Lorgar against one of his own servants instead. With a bestial roar, Engrath the Unbound materialized. The blood god Kord had violated the temporary accord the Chaos Gods had forged concerning Lorgar, and sent forth the mightiest of his bloodthirsters, the guardian of the Skull Throne, to test Lorgar's mettle. With no choice, Lorgar was forced to defend himself and duel the mighty creature, and he eventually proved himself the victor, though he was sorely wounded during the duel. Collapsing in the aftermath of his stunning victory, the Primarch struggled to stay alive, breathing blood-wet air into weak lungs. He then heard a single voice and then another, similar to the first, but somehow flawed. Lorgar looked up at the sudden appearance of another winged figure, a grotesque avian creature with weathered wings and two vultures' heads. The creature informed Lorgar that it was a representative of all the Chaos Gods that had been sent to judge the Primarch. The avian creature identified itself as Karios the Fate Weaver, the Oracle of Zinch, which we know quite a bit about if you listen to our crusade, the Terran Crusade. But I digress. The Lord of Change had come to bring the chance for a final choice. Lorgar could have personal glory or divine destiny. This moment of truth would come many solar decades in the future, during the infamous Battle of Kolth, which we will talk about later. It would be there that Lorgar had to make the most monumentous decision of his life, to fight his brother Rabute Gilliman, where he would succeed in killing him, and by doing so, achieve a sense of satisfaction and the respect of his brother Primarchs. Yet by doing so, he would also lose the coming war against the Emperor. However, if he chose to turn his back on personal glory and let Gilliman live, he would taste bitter defeat in his personal quest for the destruction of Gilliman and his 13th Legion that had been so insulting to the word bearers on Kur. But the chance for him to succeed in the illumination of humanity would be far greater. The Primarch had to choose whether he would stand amongst his brothers as an equal, with vengeance as his goal, or work in the name of the Chaos Gods, tasting shame in return for a far greater victory. No. Well, Fate Weaver's two heads normally made two predictions, one being the truth, the other a lie. In this one instance, the greater demon explained that both of his heads had told the truth. Leaving the bemused Primarch with his perplexing conundrum, Fate Weaver then disappeared back into the ether.
Ironically, Lorgar's selfless act later on in history saved the Imperium in the 41st millennium.
Maybe. But I'm almost done here, and we can talk about it then. Now, left alone once more with the dying Ingethil, Lorgar demanded to know how much of what he had seen was true. The demon replied, "All of it, none of it, or perhaps something in between." The demon had shown him what the Chaos Gods demanded and that he bare witness to. Now he wanted Ingethil to show him what he wished to see. Ingethil agreed, for it was permitted. Lorgar had seen what he must do to ensure victory. He had seen the fate of the galaxy if the Emperor's lies were not challenged. Now, the Primarch wished to walk other worlds in the eye of terror. If this was the gateway to the heaven and hell of human myth, he wanted to be shown more of it. Lorgar wished to see the possibilities in these mutable worlds, to be shown what the warp could offer humanity, if they conceded to the merging of flesh and spirit. Ingethil replied that she could do all of this, but Lorgar had one final wish before he returned to the Imperium. For there was one last thing he must see over any other. The answer to the question of what would happen if the forces of chaos lost the coming war with the Imperium. This truth changed Lorgar and the Wordbearers forever, as they were exposed to the ruinous powers of chaos and slowly corrupted. The first of the Legion of Astartes to worship the Chaos Gods and become traitors to the Emperor in their hearts. Lorgar and the Wordbearers spent the remaining years of the Great Crusade attempting to enlighten humanity about the true spiritual nature of creation, ultimately resorting to manipulation and deception to sway 9 of the Primarchs to the cause of chaos, as their gods demanded, the most notable being the War Master Horus. When it became clear that mankind could not be enlightened by chaos without first being forcibly weaned at the great price in blood from the Emperor's false imperial truth, Lorgar willingly helped orchestrate the terrible Esteban III atrocity and the drop site massacre at Esteban V, as well as the larger Horus heresy itself. When Horus openly declared his rebellion against the Emperor, the Wordbearers were one of the first legions to support him and his cause. The worlds they had conquered since their conversion to chaos also joined the side of the traitors, having been secretly corrupted to the worship of the ruinous powers in the final days of the Great Crusade. And thus, Lorgar set about the task of corrupting his brothers and starting the grinding gears of the ruinous powers, and the Imperium was doomed to a civil war in 43 years. Well, brother, before we get to the Horus heresy, what are your thoughts on Lorgar's pilgrimage?
Okay, so one of the things I find interesting is apparently his memory of this isn't as clear as it should be, because they made two main predictions here. One is that if he got in between Magnus and Russ, he would die in the resulting duel, right?
Yeah. He does, if I recall right.
He does get in between them.
Okay, so they never actually say you will die. It's always you'll probably die. So they always kind of left this little bit of slip. So if he ever thinks about it later, it's like, well, wait a minute, they told me that I would die. They never necessarily actually say that he will die.
Did say if you did. It's the one with Corvus Corax that they're just like, you will probably die.
No, both of them. They were pretty much. Yeah. So the one with Corax, anyways, they said he was almost certainly to die.
Yeah.
And then when if he stepped between Magnus, the Red, and Lehman Russ, there was a possibility that he could be slain in their duel. A possibility to be slain in their duel. So, like I said, they never really actually say you will die here. It's always just kind of a, you might, you probably will, and then he does.
On the other hand, the fact that he gets in the way, but there is no duel.
He stops the duel. if I recall right, anyways, that was, if I recall right,
Prevents a
what they're
duel.
talking about
exactly.
is it's with the weird bird Xenos, right? And when the changing starts to take place on the Thousand Suns, and one of them anyway starts to take a change, and Magnus goes to like go help him, and Lehman Russ shoots him between the eyes with his bolter,
Or shoots him anyways with his
which
bolter.
pisses off Magnus, and they're about to come to blows, and then of all people, Lorgar
Lorgar
steps
shows
between him and stops it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So technically, anyways, there was no duel because he stopped it before there was a duel.
Exactly.
Or maybe he was thinking about that. He's like, well, if they actually do come to blows, I'm probably going to die, so maybe we should stop this now. So maybe,
So I just stop this argument that may cause a duel and begin with.
I just think, anyways, you caught on rather quickly, anyways. Something I was going to bring up is literally, anyways, the whole thing about her saying, anyways, some of these people to join Chaos have to be manipulated and be brought in, anyways, into the service. Is like, she's literally telling him what she's doing to him. She's just using someone else, and he is so blinded by being Lorgar, anyways, that he just doesn't see it.
It's kind of like that there's a show, I can't remember which, I want to say it's a show on Territory 42 called Everybody Loves Raymond, where they're talking about kids that grow up and are still in their home and how horrible that is and stuff. And his brother, who happens to live with his parents, is just like, what about me? Well, you aren't like them, son.
Not you. Yeah.
Not you. And then immediately his brother goes and he's like, you gotta get out of here.
Yeah. It's just
they're lying directly to you. You gotta get out of here.
Yeah, that just that concept though, that it's just, I mean, and quite frankly, anyways, Lorgar becomes, anyways, he becomes the horrid prophet of the ruinous powers, and he becomes everything that everyone in the Imperium hates. He becomes the exact opposite of them. Like, for instance, the Ecclesiarchy and the Black Templar. He becomes the exact opposite, a devout zealot that will willingly destroy worlds for his cause. Very much like the Imperium does. He just does it for a different team. And the thing, though, that to me, anyways, that is just insane about this is that at that point, and you're going to talk about it actually here, anyways, and it comes up in the Horus Heresy, there becomes a point, anyways, where he just becomes this divine, I say in quotation, zealot of the ruinous powers. And that by that point, anyways, he's no longer being manipulated. He is just straight up, we're good to go for Khorne, Nurgle, Slaanesh, and Zinj. And at that moment, I mean, the thing is that before that point, anyways, everything that has led him to that moment is Khor Pharaoh. Just on the way, anyways, that he was raised. I mean, he was literally raised to be manipulated by this guy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when he rolls in and ironic, I will say a lot. I mean, I said a lot of things last time, anyways, that were pretty bad, anyways, about the Emperor that a lot of people probably call heresy. But one of the things, though, that he did not, I don't think that he ever really did with Lorgar is I don't think he ever tried to manipulate him. Mind you, he just thought of him as a tool,
Yeah.
but I don't think he manipulated him. So there was no love lost or anything like that. But at the same time, anyways, I don't think he ever really tried to manipulate Lorgar. It was just very much, this is the way it's supposed to be. Go forth and conquer, kind of thing. It was never, trying to convince Lorgar, anyways, this was the right thing to do. But quite frankly, he didn't have to either. Because Lorgar was just like, praise be to Space King, So, but like I said, this really all kind of falls, anyways, at the feet of Khor Pharaoh. Just the way that Lorgar was raised. If he'd been raised by anybody else, it would have been interesting if he would even gone on this pilgrimage. Or even if he had gone on this pilgrimage, when he starts talking to this demon, figuring it out while she's talking with him. Wait a minute. You're manipulating me, aren't you? Kind of thing. But at this point, anyways, the stone has been cast. So
You mean the
All right,
die?
let's go ahead and tell us anyways how he brings the destruction of humanity. He's in the early 31st millennium with the thing known as the Horus Heresy.
Ah, yes.
Yes.
It was Lorgar and the Word Bearers who ultimately converted the War Master Horus to the worship of chaos by introducing his legion, the Luna Wolves, to the warrior lodges which were picked up from the world of Divin. Later, in a plot involving the Word Bearer chaplain Erebus,
Ugh.
Horus was manipulated to return to Divin, where he would be wounded and in that poisoned state prove more malleable to corruption by the Chaos Gods.
Right.
Once again, proving that Erebus is the worst.
Yeah. And by the way, if you want to know more about that, we did a whole 2 months on the Horus Heresy, and we talk about Horus. Just Horus.
and you know this is going to
And
be
it's
coming up again in our next one when it's Corpheron and Erebus.
Yeah. We're going to be talking a little bit about Horus Heresy, which I personally enjoy doing. But
The Legion kept their new... Huh?
quite frankly, anyways, pardon me, anyways. Why don't we just... Okay, so we like I said, we've talked about the atrocity of Esfand 3. We have a whole Vox on it. We have a whole Vox on the Drop Site Massacre. And the fall of Horus. We have that too. And if you guys want to hear that anyways, we've done a bunch of them anyways. We even on the Drop Site Massacre, we mentioned anyways, Corvus, Corax beats the crap out of Lorgar. And that was in what Vox was that one called again? I think
Drop Site Massacre.
It was just called the Drop Site Massacre. But
and Isfon 3 was just, I think it was either Isfon 3 or it was the purging of Isfon 3. So
right. So why don't we go ahead and just skip a bit further anyways to after the Drop Site Massacre, because Lorgar's fate drastically changed from goes in a different direction than what we talked about when we talked about the Horus Heresy.
Right. So 4 solar days after the Drop Site Massacre on Isfon 5, Horus Lupercal assembled those Primarchs who stood in opposition of the Imperium aboard his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. They all knew the costs of the coming campaign and their destinies within it. The traitor fleets were underway, but after the unpleasantness of Isfon, this was the first time they had gathered a full fraternity. 8 Primarchs were present, though only half of them were physically in the room where the gathering took place. This included Fulgrim, Perturabo, Angron, and Lorgar. The absent 4 were nothing more than holographic projections. 3 of them, Conrad, Kurz, Mortarion, and Alfarius, manifested around the table in the forms of flickering gray holothic simulacra. The 4th of them as a brighter image comprised of silver radiance of brilliant witchfire. This last image was, of course, Magnus the Red, who projected himself from afar by sorcerer's means from the sorcerer's planet, where he was still licking his wounds from the recent burning of Prospero by Lehman Russ's Space Wolves.
Is it mentioned anywhere, by the way, where Omegon is?
I don't even know if anybody knows if Omegon exists at this point.
So if you're picturing this, it's really actually... So Alfarius is sitting there anyways, with his hands behind his back at, in front of the picture camera anyways. It's sitting there anyways. And then in the corner, around the corner anyways, there's Omegon. He's taking notes. I'm assuming about what's taking place. I figured they're both there, but just one of them's on screen.
And it's instead of Alfarius, it's Omegon.
It's probably Omegon. Alfarius went out to get coffee or something. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, in this situation, I think you'll have a better natural, genuine reaction here. So I'm going to go get myself something to drink. You stay here. Got it. As soon as Lorgar had taken his seat at the council table, he could not take his eyes off of his brother Fulgrim. The War Master grew ever more weary of his brother's inability to adhere to established planning and his lack of attention to the important gathering. Before the meeting could properly get underway, Lorgar slowly reached for the ornate Crozius mace on his back. As he drew the weapon in the company of his closest kin, his eyes remained locked on one of them, and all physically present felt the deepening chill of psychic frost rhyming along their armor. The word-bearer Primarch accused the thing that mimicked his brother in physical appearance as not being who he purported to be. Before anyone could react, Lorgar's Crozius mace struck the supposed Emperor Children's Primarch. Fulgrim crashed into the back wall. His prostrate form crumpled to the ground. Turning his fierce eyes upon his other brothers, he declared that this pretender was not Fulgrim. The other Primarchs that were present advanced upon the changeling, drawing their own weapons. The War Master tried to placate the enraged Lorgar. His merest threat of confrontation had usually been enough to quell Lorgar from any rash actions in the past. But as they faced Aurelian now, even Horus was wide-eyed in the changes wrought within him since Isfahan V. Clutching his mace in his crimson-colored gauntlets, defying his brothers, he warned them to stay back. When Horus once again attempted to calm the enraged Primarch, Lorgar was surprised at the sudden realization that the War Master already knew that Fulgrim was not whom he pretended to be. The War Master informed his fellow Primarchs they would personally deal with this situation and dismiss them all from his chambers, with the exception of Lorgar. Now, I do have to ask you this. What do you think the other Primarchs' reactions were to this entire thing that were present?
The people that were on different ships, it was probably just kind of like an eyebrow raise, like, wow, okay, that's different. Because they're not there.
Right.
So, like, if you're watching on Terran 42, you're watching an action film and someone gets stabbed in the face. It's like, wow, that sucks. Even if you didn't see it coming, you just get like, whoa. It might alarm you, but at the same time, you're just like, it's there, not here. So who was there? Angron.
So the other ones that were there, other than Lorgar, was Perturabo and Angron were the other two that weren't.
And Fulgrim. Well, what was Fulgrim? Yeah, and then Horus. Well, Horus you kind of already explained, anyways. Fulgrim I don't really care about because it's not really Fulgrim. And then Angron, quite frankly, anyways, I think more than anything, anyways, probably amused. Just simply because that's kind of Angron. It's like, oh, fighting,
I wanted to be like, oh wow, when did this happen? When did Lorgar actually get some sort of spy?
I don't think that he cared enough about Lorgar to actually think about that. I think it was more along the lines of cool fighting. Well, who's gonna win this one? I've got 5 credits on Fulgrim or whatever, or Gilts or whatever you're using. I think the person, anyways, that'd be most interested in this actually would be Perturabo. That was there. I think, anyways. I don't think that he would have tried to move against Lorgar, but I think I could definitely see Perturabo, anyways, sitting in the corner, anyways, kind of, if he had a beard, anyways, stroking it, kind of going. This is interesting. This is a new development because this is not like Lorgar. So I think, anyways,
it would believe Lorgar when he said that this isn't Fulgrim.
I think so. I think it definitely, anyways, was one of those, anyways, he kind of looks over at Fulgrim, looks back at Lorgar, and just kind of like, probably if Horus had let it go farther than that, anyways, Perturabo probably would have spoken up and like, okay, then what is it? If this isn't Fulgrim, what is it? Not only that, but I think what really kind of pushed it in Lorgar's perspective is that I think he was able to throw him up against the wall. I think that really helped.
Well, yeah, I was like to say, I would assume Fulgrim.
If it was Fulgrim, I don't know if he could do that. That's one of those things. I mean, he might have been able to. He might. But
I think Fulgrim would have the presence of mind of being wary of the fact that somebody was constantly staring at him throughout the entire thing.
If it was Fulgrim, he's like, "You see something you like?"
But
Or even just,
that's Fulgrim.
okay, why is he still looking at me? Seriously.
But no, I think anyways, with him throwing him against the wall, anyways, really gave credence anyways to Perturabo that wasn't Fulgrim. Like, oh, if Lorgar of all people, anyways, could psychically throw him against the wall, then
Well, I think that itself being no, he wasn't psychically thrown. He was like hit.
oh, he hit him. I thought he
Crozius.
psychically like force choked him into the wall. That's the way that I've always kind of read it. But okay, well, he just slams his mace into him anyways. Regardless, I think anyways that Perturabo will look at this and gone, okay, this is new information. Something's gone on with Lorgar. He's a little bit different. He's a little bit angry. But secondly, anyways, I think he also would have judged his power a little bit more and it's like, this is something I need to investigate. And then thirdly, anyways, I think he really would have believed Lorgar and gone, yeah, that's not Fulgrim, because Fulgrim, if Lorgar tried to throw him against the wall, Fulgrim would have pulled out his sword and killed him. Because that's Fulgrim.
Or done something other than just accept a blow from Lorgar's Crozius.
Lorgar,
he was struck by it.
As we've talked about before, anyways, Perturabo is a lot more
analytical
and cranial, in the way that he does things. Cerebral. That's what not cranial. Cerebral. Well, both kind of work, but very much more cerebral, anyways, in the way that he does things. So I could definitely see him though when this all took place, anyways, going, wow, that's a whole lot more information. This is new. This is something that needs to be investigated. But the like I said, the people that are just watching, on the other hand, anyways, I think they either just kind of a raised eyebrow or maybe even a smirk, like, my brothers are getting into it again. I just don't see them, anyways, really just like panic, kind of concept.
Mental note: research more on.
I think we've talked about this plenty. So. So how does the Warsmith anyway, or the War Master, calm everything down?
Well, the War Master attempted to restrain his brother by placing his hand on Lorgar's shoulder, but the Primarch psychically commanded Horus to remove his hand.
Wow.
Unable to resist, Horus obeyed. His fingers shivered as they withdrew, and his gray eyes flickered with tension. As the enraged Lorgar strode away from the council chambers, Horus commented that his brother had changed since crossing blades with Korax on the surface of Isfon 5. No! Sorry. Lorgar replied that
quite frankly, this is one of my favorite parts about Lorgar's story, just simply because it's just like, they could have just said all of this anyways in one simple sentence. And at this moment, Lorgar grew a pair. I mean, that's literally what it is. It's just like, oh no.
Not only that, but he actually had something to back it up now.
Yeah. It's like the lion anyway, or the lion being just like this little cub of a character. Then all of a sudden, just like, poof.
I am the lion.
It's like, oh no, we're all dead. Kind of the same concept here. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Lorgar replied that everything had changed that night. He then took his leave and returned to his ship to contemplate what he perceived as utter foulness. Aboard Lorgar's flagship, Fidelitas Lex, the Primarch was visited by a projected phantasm of his brother Magnus the Red, composed of silver witchfire. The Red Cyclops wished to discuss some urgent matters in private. The Thousand Sons Primarch was trying to gauge his brother's reactions in light of recent events, as well as the skeins of fate that all seemed to intertwine and converge towards Lorgar, who stood at their nexus. Lorgar explained that he had seen the truth of the very pilgrimage his brother had demanded he never make. And after Isfon 5, a veil had been lifted from his eyes. There was no longer any need to hold back, for if they restrained themselves, they would lose the war, and humanity would lose its only chance at enlightenment. The Crimson King cautioned Lorgar against the careless and blatant use of his psychic abilities in such a primitive and brutal manner, for he was inviting the presence of dangerous warp entities into his midst. Lorgar brushed off his brother's advice and retorted that his opinion on the matter was mute, since he had delved too deeply in the powers of the Immaterium and brought down the wrath of the wolves upon his homeworld. He was now lord of a traitorous legion that had been damned in the eyes of their brother legions and only stood on the side of the War Master because they were now exiles. So, yeah, I'm trying to keep people loyal and yet bash them at the same time. Okay.
There's some things, like I said, anyways. There's a drastic change here, anyways, with Lorgar. Before, Lorgar really thought highly of Magnus because he thought, like I said, anyways, he thought Magnus was the most powerful out of all of them because he was the most attuned to the warp. And now, anyways, he's just like, you mewling, pathetic coward. You should have just died on Tiska. You're not. He becomes the zealot. So it's this aspect of you're with us not because you think, anyways, what you're doing is right. You're doing it because you have no other choice. Which, I mean, I can wholeheartedly understand, anyways, Lorgar. Well, actually, both positions here, but I can understand, anyways, Lorgar. Anyways, Lorgar really becomes Chaos's version of a Black Templar. That's what he is. He's like a true zealot for Chaos.
Yeah, but at the same
and anybody that doesn't follow that belief system, anyways, he can work with if they're working for the same goals, but he's not a big fan of them because they just don't have the righteous awesomeness, anyways, of following the same beliefs that he does.
Yeah.
That makes sense? Hence why, anyways, he's just like looking at Magnus is like, it's probably also, anyways, he's probably shaking his head going, I used to look up to you, kind of thing. And now, anyways, I look at you and you're small and insignificant. Go back to your little hole in the Eye of Terror, I don't need you anymore.
Which is ironic because technically, if you think about it, Magnus could have just gone, okay, and just left. Because, I mean, him and his Astartes are in the Eye of Terror. It's not like they have to go out there and help. Not really. They could have just stayed put and gone, okay.
Well, they weren't, in the Siege of Terror, they weren't super helpful either. But, I mean, he does try to show up and murder the Emperor, and Vulcan takes care of that. But, I mean, it's just.
He almost does. There's only one problem. Vulcan.
Yeah. That's not who we're talking about. We're talking about Lorgar. Sorry to interrupt you here, but yeah, keep going, man.
Curious about the references to his legion, Magnus attempted to subtly probe his brother's mind, but was strongly rebuffed and warned by Lorgar never to seek to pry into his thoughts again. Magnus was astounded at Lorgar's powerful new abilities. Lorgar revealed to Magnus that since his abilities had grown more powerful, he had been able to delve deeply in the schemes of fate, both past and future. He forewarned Magnus that his legion was not free of the flesh change his legion had once so feared. Lorgar warned him to beware of those amongst his sons that failed to embrace it as the gift that it was. The Crimson King then decided to change the subject and began speaking of their brother Fulgrim and the terrible fate that had befallen him. Lorgar then chastised his brother Magnus for not telling him the truth 5 solar decades earlier and for trying to keep him from taking the pilgrimage where he finally discovered the truth about the primordial annihilator and other things he had discovered about the true reality of the warp since then. Magnus claimed he had only done this to protect Lorgar from his own self-righteous certainty and arrogance in his beliefs. Which, to be fair,
there's nothing worse.
See how things went? I think he was right in trying to not do it. Let him know.
There's nothing worse than a self-righteous zealot. Especially anyways, if there's stuff anyways that you knew and you just didn't tell them. Because it'll
Well,
always
it's just
come back
like-
to haunt you.
It's just like, though, it's like, why didn't you tell me? Because you turn out the exact way that you have. I can't say that to you now, can I?
Quite frankly, anyways, he might not have. It's just up until this point, anyways, and before the pilgrimage and whatnot, Lorgar was always just he was the guy everybody kicked around, quite frankly, and he was okay with it because that's the way that he was raised. But I mean, like Gilliman, anyways, he's like, check this out, punt, see if we can get him across the goal line, kind of thing. It's just all of his brothers were like that. None of them really got along with him. They all just kind of looked at him as this weakling. And now, anyways, they're dressed. Now, anyways, it's kind of interesting. And I wonder what Magnus really thought, because now all of a sudden you're talking to a guy that no longer, anyways, is acting like a weakling. And you can tell, anyways, by his presence, he is no longer weak.
Well, part of what he's probably thinking is, see, this is exactly why I didn't, because this is how you've turned out.
I was thinking more along the lines, anyways, Magnus was probably shaking his head going, if we could have just unlocked this earlier, but for a different purpose, it would have been better.
Yeah.
No, now my planet's destroyed. You're pilgrimaging. This has all gone terribly wrong.
This is one of the few times where I can say that it isn't my fault.
But it is technically his fault because he actually didn't really, teach Lorgar anything. So, yeah, another thing, anyways, that it's Magnus's fault.
Well, actually, that was the Emperor's fault, because the Emperor specifically said, you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't let anybody else know anything about the warp. You hear
Or
me?
you talking about the Council of Nicaea?
No. This was
He knew
before the
Lorgar
Council
before
of
then.
Nicaea. The Emperor showed him the warp, everything
Oh.
about it, and then he said, you can't tell anybody about the warp that I just showed you.
Well, okay. Well, he had to have told somebody, and they should have told somebody because there were librarians before then. That's another weird, confusing thing. We'll get into it some other time, but we really need to get back
talk
to
about the Thousand Suns eventually.
We got to talk about. We're here to talk about Lorgar.
Yeah. Lorgar tersely replied that he stood at the right hand of the new emperor, commanding the second largest legion in the Imperium, while Magnus was a broken soul leading a shattered legion. Perhaps he had been one that needed protection, or the one whose arrogance led to his downfall. Magnus could not claim the same, for they both knew the truth, but only one of them had faced it. Lorgar grew angry, calling Magnus a coward for knowing the primordial truth yet failing to embrace it. Chaos was only grotesque because they had seen it with mortal eyes. But when they ascended, they would be chosen children of the gods. Magnus interrupted his brother's monologue, lashing out angrily with his psychic abilities. The Crimson King had grown weary of Lorgar's petty banter. Magnus challenged his brother that if he knew the truths behind their reality, then to show him. Tell him what he had seen at the end of his accursed pilgrimage. Lorgar informed his brother of everything that occurred many decades ago. Crimson King knew that what his brother had spoken of was true, but one lingering question remained. Would Lorgar face their brother Rubuti Gilman at Kelth? The arisen response was enigmatic, as he explained to Magnus that although some of his word bearers would indeed go to Kelth, some would not. He would only reveal his plans to the Red Cyclops when he had committed himself fully to the War Master and his cause. Following their private exchange, Lorgar once again attended the War Master upon the Vengeful Spirit, this time in the company of Angron, Primarch of the World Eaters. Later aboard the Vengeful Spirit, Lorgar, still perturbed by Horus's refusal to deal with the Fulgrim impersonator, angrily snapped that his apostles were prepared to sail into Ultramar. He reminded the War Master that they had made pacts with divine forces Horus still struggled to comprehend. Demons of the Warp would answer their summons. The Word Bearer's cargo holds, heaved with the bodies of faithful mortals, Taken from the worlds the 17th Legion had conquered, for they had not been idle these many years. The War Master pointed out that Lorgar needed legionnaires. Lorgar retorted that perhaps Horus should lend him a few of his companies to accompany him to the east. Horus promised his brother that he would give him more than that. He would give him another legion. You see, when the War Master Horus turned his back on the Imperium, swore his allegiance to his powers, chaos, and began the Horus Heresy, his first act before making his break with the Emperor of Mankind was to lure away as many loyalist legions from Terra as possible. Horus ordered Guilliman to lead an expeditionary force to the world of Kalth in the Viridium system in the realm of Ultramar to prepare for a campaign in the eastern fringe of the galaxy where Horus claimed an orc war was amassing.
Pardon me real quick. So he did with Rabute Gilman kind of what he did with the Lion, where he sent him off and he went on a bogus mission. He just needed him away. But here in this particular situation, he's actually leading Gilman into an ambush, if I recall right. Yes?
Pretty much. Horus expected the Ultramarines to await the arrival of the Word-Bearers who would join the 13th Legion in prosecuting a campaign against the Orc menace. Unknown to Guilliman, the 17th Legion had long before turned traitor in service to the Chaos Gods, and its Primarch, Lorgar, gleefully accepted Horus's orders to close the trap on his Legion's long-hated rivals. Lorgar ordered his two most trusted advisors, First Chaplain Erebus and the Dark Apostle Corferon, to unleash their wrath against the realm of Ultramar. This was done in retaliation to the humiliation the 17th Legion had been forced to endure by being forced to kneel in disgrace before the Emperor and Rabute Gilman and his Ultramarines on the world of Kur by the 13th Legion at the Emperor's orders during the Great Crusade. The Word-Bearers' sudden attack decimated Guilliman's Legion fleet, and the Ultramarines' ground troops quickly found themselves impossibly outnumbered by their former allies as the infamous Battle of Kalth erupted. The Word-Bearers slew their loyalist foes in droves in the early stages of their surprise attack and pushed them back over huge stretches of territory. Unknown to them, Guilliman's flagship, which had survived the initial Word-Bearers' attack on the Ultramarines' fleet, effected emergency repairs and regrouped with the other surviving Ultramarine starships in space. Having taken stock of his remaining forces, Guilliman sent an immediate astropathic distress call to Macragge. Those Marines on Kalth, Ultramarines all, had been forced into a fighting retreat, but soon occupied fortified positions. Many Ultramarines had been born on Kalth and proved more resolute than the Word-Bearers anticipated. In space, Guilliman's vessels began hit-and-run attacks on their overconfident enemy. Guilliman assessed his ground troops' positions and broadcast clear, concise orders to each pocket of defense, coordinating them into cohesive force. One Ultramarines force, led by Captain Ventanas, led a breakout and retook Kalth's defense laser silos, aiding the sorely pressed Ultramarines fleet from the surface of Kalth. Guilliman's depleted forces slowed the Word-Bearers down long enough for the remainder of the Ultramarines Legion to arrive and rout the traitor Marines from the system, though at a heavy cost. The Word-Bearers turned Kalth's own orbital defense platforms on the Viridian star, stripping away the outer layers of its photosphere and destabilizing it, ultimately rendering the surface of Kalth uninhabitable. At the same time, the Word-Bearers had used the battle taking place on Kalth to summon a massive warp storm called the Ruin Storm that was intended to cut off Ultramar from the rest of the galaxy and prevent the Ultramarines from providing any reinforcement to Terra, as Horus made his assault upon humanity's homeworld. The eruption of the Ruin Storm cut off Kalth from the main body of the Ultramarines Legion and left the Astartes of the 13th Legion trapped on Kalth, locked in a brutal subterranean war with those Word-Bearer units that had also been left behind when their Legion retreated from the Viridian system. Yet Robute Gilman and a large portion of his legion had remained off-world as a result of the Wordbearers' devious assault upon the Ultramarines' fleet. Blade but unbowed, the Ultramarines received the orders of Malcador the Sigillite, the Emperor's regent, while he was indisposed pursuing the secret Imperial Webway project, and prepared to meet the needs of the Imperium's defense against the traitor legions as best they could. Unknown to Erebus and Corferon, their Primarch had also had a secret objective in mind, where he had sent his two most zealous sons to Calth. After their humiliation at Kur, thousands of word-bearers within the Legion detested the Ultramarines. The Urizen ordered a great gathering of his Legion while their fleet was already en route to Calth. The Primarch called for Argal Tal, the leader of the Gaul Vorbak, and one other word-bearer officer who would eventually become commanders and apostles amongst the elite Vakra Jal. The Primarch wanted their counsel on what to do with those amongst their legion he no longer trusted. The word-bearers had culled their ranks down through the decades, removing such unrepentantly loyalist elements such as the Terran-born warriors of their legion, but had carried out no purgings like this Von 3 atrocity that Angron was so proud of. Lorgar knew that the loyalty of his own legion to both him and his vision of mankind transformed through an embrace of chaos was never in doubt. But competence was another matter entirely. Lorgar asked what should be done with those warriors of the 17th Legion he felt were no longer reliable, those whose hatred burned brighter than their sense. For tens of thousands of them, whole companies, whole chapters, their rage was no longer pure. It was decided that these suspect elements of the Legion would be gathered into a single host and ordered to undertake the sacred mission to Calth to assault the Ultramarines that they had so craved. They were led by Erebus and Corferon and were expected to martyr themselves in glory. The other traitor legions, such as the Emperor's Children, Sons of Horus, and the World Eaters, might have purged their own ranks at Isfahan III, but the Wordbearers had proceeded to purge their own at Calth.
So this is actually kind of ironic because this is where I think, anyways, Corferon and Erebus figure out, anyways, they're dealing with a different animal. Remember, they've been manipulating Lorgar for centuries.
Well, I don't know how much Erebus has.
Corferon definitely has, though. So I like the fact that, anyways, Lorgar at this point, anyways, is like, let's get rid of those guys that we don't like. Erebus, Corferon, you guys are going to lead those guys.
Of course, on the other hand,
don't worry, if you die, you'll be martyrs. You know?
Yeah.
I like this. I like this new Lorgar. I mean, just on the sole purpose, he's getting rid of the two worst guys on the planet, in the galaxy. But
yeah. On the other hand, you could have just been going, these are the two people that'll make sure that everybody dies.
Anywho, how did it go?
Though the 17th Legion had achieved a monumental victory of sorts, it was all a matter of perspective. Piercing the veil of the warp, Lorgar had heard the whisperings of the Chaos Gods and had witnessed the truth for himself. Yes, Erebus had successfully conjured the ruined storm at Calth. But ultimately, Erebus and Corferon had failed to achieve their overall objectives. Robute Gilman was still alive, and the Wordbearers had lost half the fleet at Calth to an Ultramarines counterattack and tens of thousands of Wordbearers, including the Gal Vorbak and mortal servants, had been abandoned to useless subterranean war beneath Calth's irradiated surface, while the two Wordbearer commanders had fled. This meant that the Wordbearers left behind were left to die, never being reinforced, which, correct me if I'm wrong, that's what the whole idea of sending them to Calth was, right? As a culling?
I started
To
chuckling.
get rid of them?
Because I started chuckling because it said, but ultimately, Erebus and Corferon had failed to achieve their overall objectives. I was about to pipe in, dying?
Well, here's the thing that's funny.
I mean, that's why I started laughing. He was like, everybody else, anyways, is really, that knows any history of 40K, anyways, is hoping, dying? It didn't work.
their overall objective, okay, yeah, but wasn't the objective also to get rid of everybody that were unreliable? To me, it sounds like they are pretty much the only people that came back, pretty much.
Well, there are a few of them.
So that means that was a pretty good, successful culling there.
Well, I think, by the way, anyways, you know how you mentioned, anyways, that Gore Vorbak or Gal Vorbak, anyways, gets stabbed by Erebus.
No, it's not Gal Vorback. It's of
Yeah. Sorry, no, the other guy,
It's
the leader of the Gal Vorbak. Sorry, my bad.
Argyle Tall.
Yeah, pardon me, thanks, anyways, because I mean, there are a few people out there that like Erebus. Because the concept is that, well, he's just the chaos guy. He just changes things because that's what the Runos powers want. No. He's after power, like every other human being on in the galaxy. He just is okay with stabbing people in the back repeatedly. and so, I mean, I think at this point, anyways, he realizes that the guy he's been manipulating for the last few hundred years is done with it. Lorgar, so he needs to make himself useful again. Well, how do you do that? Well, eliminate the lieutenants that he has around him so that you become more important.
Yeah.
Hence, anyways, the leader of the Gal Vorbak just stab. Or stabbity stab.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that next time. Sorry. It just every time, anyways. There's a chance that Corferon or Erebus dies. It's just like, yes. Oh. Didn't happen.
Doesn't Corferon eventually die?
No, he's still around.
He's still around?
He's still around in the 42nd millennium. We'll talk about that next week. But anyways, sorry, carry on.
I like Erebus as a character better than I do Corferon personally, but which is saying something. But as a character, I say. Re-emphasizing that as a character. All those Gal Vorbak who had spent months of their lives fasting, praying, scarring their flesh in preparation for a chance to taste the divine blood, they had simply been lost for no real gain. Though Lorgar was somewhat displeased, Erebus had more or less achieved the base level of success required of him. The Ruin Storm had been conjured, and the rogue elements of the Word Bearers had been culled. Now it is time for Lorgar to further his own plans and complete the campaign against the Ultramarines he had come to call his Shadow Crusade. Simultaneous with the Wordbearers' assault on Calth, Lorgar and the more reliable Wordbearers under his command launched a second offensive, a joint Shadow Crusade with his brother Angron's World Eaters Legion into the rest of the realm of Ultramar.
Ooh. That's the Shadow Wars. Now, I talked about this. I think it was maybe my fourth short box. You mind if I take the reins on this one?
Not at all, brother. The stage is yours.
Right. Well, as you were saying, the Word Bearers and the World Eaters began their deadly advance, laying waste to the 500 worlds with reckless abandon, slaughtering 26 worlds in rapid succession. This was to ensure the success of the Sorcerous Runestorm, which would ultimately split the void asunder, dividing the galaxy in two, and rendering vast tracts of the Imperium impassable for centuries, effectively cutting Ultramar off from the rest of the Imperium. This prodigious warp storm would deny needed reinforcements to the Loyalists as Horus drove on Terra in an attempt to overthrow the Emperor of Mankind. Nothing from Terra would get in and nothing would get out. Not even an astropathic whisper would be able to pierce this storm of warp energy, bleeding into real space. During this campaign of destruction, Lorgar had come to realize that over the course of their Shadow Crusade, Angron's temperament and mental stability had steadily grown much worse. His cybernetic neural implants, known as the Butcher's Nails, were killing him faster than Lorgar had originally imagined, faster than anyone realized. The rate of degeneration had accelerated very quickly in the months after the Battle of Calth. The implants had never been designed for a peculiar genetics of the Primarch's brain. Angron's physiology was trying to heal the damage produced by the implants as the nails bit even deeper. To save his life, Lorgar convinced the Lord of the World Eaters to go back to his homeworld in Nyceria. The overlords of the gladiatorial games on the world who had first hammered the foul device into Angron's skull would know more about the implant's functions than the Traitor Legion savants and the Dark Mechanicum. The two Primarchs would learn all that was known of Nycerian's insidious corporeal implant technology, and then they would burn that loathsome world until its surface was nothing but glass. Angron would finally take vengeance he pretended to no longer desire. Whether Angron fought him, hated him, or trusted him mattered little to Lorgar, who intended to drag Angron into the immortality that he deserved before the Dark Gods, whether he wanted it or not. Guilliman's Retribution fleet, on the other hand, which had been tracking the rest of the Word-Bearers' Legion in the wake of the Battle of Kolth, finally caught up to the traitors upon Angron's homeworld, Nyceria, which the World Eaters' Legion were preoccupied with wiping clean of all life and vengeance for the treatment Nycerians had merited out a century before to Angron. The 13th Legion warship Courage Above All, Guilliman's temporary flagship, broke warp at the system's edge, at the head of a large void armada consisting of 41 vessels. The Ultramarines' armada looked wounded, cobbled together from separate fleets. It was not a dedicated interdiction war fleet, but clearly a ragtag strike force, a lance thrust to the enemy's heart. Guilliman himself had done the best he could with limited resources. The 13th Legion's cruisers and battleships ran abeam of the enemy fleet for repeated exchanges of broadsides, offering targets too big and powerful to ignore, while the rest of the Ultramarines fleet used calculated land strikes from safer range. The Armada then divided its assault potential, doing its utmost to destroy Lorgar's flagship Fidelitas Lex, and attempting to take the World Eater's flagship Conqueror in a boarding action. But the Ultramarines' warships not only fought a void war, they also attempted to take the fight to the surface in Nyceria. For this attack was personal. The Ultramarines had come for vengeance against Lorgar and the Word-Bearers, just as they had pursued Corferon all the way to the Maelstrom on the other side of Ultramar. Several Ultramarine warships attempted to make a run on Nyceria, hemorrhaging drop pods, landers, and gunships, forcing planetfall by any means necessary. The Ultramarines swept over and against the traitors like an insect horde. But the tenacious commander of the Conqueror, Motera Sarin, put up a difficult fight and destroyed a number of Ultramarine vessels that attempted to make a run for the surface. Though the World Eater's flagship transformed a number of the smaller vessels into flaming wreckages, the Ultramarines eventually punched through her tenacious defense and managed to land troops on the surface of Nyceria. Now, meanwhile, the Fidelitas Lex was already a ruin, its armor pitted and cracked, its shields a memory. The cathedrals and spinal fortresses barnacling along its back were gone, laid waste by Ultramarines' incendiary rage. The 13th Legion's armada attacked in strafing runs and protracted exchanges of broadsides, trading fire from the superior warship and accepting their own casualties as the cost of bleeding the bigger vessel dry. Each assault left the Lex weaker, firing fewer turrets and cannons, taking punishment on its increasingly fragile armor. But she fought on. Crawling with smaller ships, the Lex lashed back with the remaining macro cannons, flashing in the light of its own burning hull. Guilliman guided the battle from the command deck of the Courage Above All, and had decided that the Lex would die first, killed in the death of 1,000 cuts and swept from the game board, while the Conqueror would be boarded and killed from within. In the course of the Battle of Nycerian orbit, the Conqueror would not rise to its sister ship's defense. Both Traitor Legion flagships fought alone, starved of support and suffering the endless attacks of the 13th Legion's ragged armada. Salvation pods streamed from the Lex's sides and underbelly, along with heavier Mechanicum craft and bulk landers. With the legionaries of the word bearers already on the surface, the ship's human population fled in the vessel's final minutes. Yet still, the great vessel fought on, rolling, turning, raging. The Ultramarines' cruisers that drifted past burned as badly as the warship they were killing. This void battle was a form of dirty fighting between warships, too close for the neat calculation of ranged battery fire. Instead, it was an up-and-close personal slugfest. The Ultramarines' battle barge armsmen intercepted the Conqueror and came abeam, launching assault carriers and boarding torpedoes. While the World Eater's flagship was busy repelling boarders, a number of the smaller 13th Legion vessels slipped past her defenses and launched drop pods, gunships, and troop carriers. The first drop pods hammered home on the planet's surface. Sealed doors unlocked and the first Ultramarines poured forth. Bolters raised, moving in perfect and well-trained unity. But the World Eaters were waiting for them. Those not lost to the Butcher's nails at once had the presence of mind to note that these Ultramarines were in not the pristine cobalt blue warriors they had previously faced on the war world of Armatura. These legionaries of the 13th wore cracked power armor, still scarred and burn-washed from some horrendous battle weeks or months before. These were the hardened veterans of the Calth atrocity. They burned with a cold intensity to carry out the vengeance in their hearts, and were intent on getting to grips with the word-bearers. Now, as was their way, the Ultramarines established footholds at defensible positions, clearing room for the reinforcements to land. For every position they held, another was overrun by the World Eaters in a storm of roaring axes, as lost to the word-bearers chanting implacable advance. The 12th Legion crashed against the 13th in rapid packs, showing why Imperial forces had feared to fight alongside them for decades. Uncontrolled, unbound, unrestrained, they butchered their way through Ultramarine strongpoints, enslaved to the joy of battle because of the Butcher's nails, cortically implants sandwiched within the meats of their minds. The 17th Legion also met the Loyalist cousins, replacing ferocity with spite and hate. The Ultramarines returned it in kind, hungry for vengeance against the vile traitors who defiled Calth and damaged its stars. The word-bearer units marched, droning black hymns and chanting sermons from the Book of Lorgar, bearing corpse-strewn icons of befouled metal and bleached bone above their regiments. As the fighting raged, the burning shell of the Fidelitas Lex cut through the clouds into the planet's atmosphere, shuddering on its way east, rolling ever downwards, achingly slow for something of such scale. The weight of the Lex's massive plasma engines dragging the stern down first, colliding with the Nucerian ocean surface, far from shore. In the meantime, the demigod in gold and blue had finally found the object of his obsession amidst the clamor of war. Guilliman confronted Lorgar, possessing the advantage of two weapons. But Lorgar's Crozius gave him reach his brother lacked. When they first met, there were no furious trades of frantic blows, nor were there any melodramatic speeches of vengeance avowed. The two Primarchs came together once, power fist against war maul, and backed away from the resulting flare of repelling energy fields. Their warriors killed each other around them both, and neither Primarch spared their sons a glance. Lorgar flicked the clinging lightning from the head of his Crozius, shaking his head in slow denial. Both Primarchs fought without heed of their warriors, their godlike movements an inconceivable blur to the Space Marines fighting around them. None had ever imagined the heroes of this new age would take the field against each other, nor could they have predicted the wellsprings of spite between them. Guilliman confronted Lorgar for what his legion had done across the 500 worlds of Ultramar. In his righteous anger, the Ultramarines Primarch struck Lorgar with one of his fists, battering Lorgar's sternum. Lorgar repulsed him with a projected burst of telekinesis, weak and wavering, but enough to send his brother staggering. The Crozius followed, its power field trailing lightning as Lorgar hammered it into the side of Guilliman's head with the force of a cannonball. Both Primarchs faced each other beneath the gray sky, one bleeding internally, the other with half of his face lost to blood, sheeting from a fractured skull. As the two Primarchs were locked in this furious life and death struggle, they were oblivious to the destruction being wrought around them. Then, suddenly, Angron burst forth from the Ultramarine ranks, his armor a shattered wreck, and both of his chainswords spat goblets of ceramite armor plated with scarlet gore. Angron was plastered with the blood of the slain after hours in the crush of the front lines of intense combat. On his chest hung a bandolier of skulls, taken from the mass graves of Desh-Eleke Ridge. Blood painted them as surely as it marked Angron. Even through the constant pain generated by the butcher's nails, it pleased him. He wanted his deceased brothers and sisters to taste blood once more. He had carried them from across Assyria, letting their empty eyes witness the razing of his former hated world. The World Eater launched himself at Guilliman with a murderous hatred. The two Primarchs fell into a seamless, roaring duel where Lorgar and Guilliman had abandoned theirs. Guilliman found himself forced back by the storm of Angron's blows. It was then that Guilliman landed a glancing blow, his first pounding across Angron's breastplate. One of the skulls of Angron's fallen kinsmen that hung from a chain worn across his breastplate was partially shattered and scattered across the ground. Guilliman stepped back, his boot crushing a skull's remnants to powder. Angron saw it and threw himself at his brother, his howl of wrath defying mortal origins, impossibly ripe in its anguish. Lorgar saw it too. The moment of Guilliman's boot broke the skull, he felt the warp boil behind the veil. The bearer of the words started chanting in a language never before spoken by any living being, his words in faultless harmony with Angron's cry of torment. Lorgar enacted his dark plan to save his brother's life, summoning the rune storm to the world of Assyria, tearing the sky open and unleashing a crimson torrent, formed from the ghosts of 100 murdered worlds, raining blood. Lorgar focused his concentration on the triumphant form of his mutilated brother, calling for the Neverborn, the entities men called demons, to answer in kind. He locked Angron's muscles, setting fire to the synapses in his brain. The first spasm racked their way through Angron's sinews, turning his blood to quicksilver, then to lava, and at last to holy fire. His cries of thwarted rage were tainted by an agony beyond comprehension. His body started tearing itself apart, growing, rising, perfecting, after a lifetime of broken torture. This was the moment of Angron's apotheosis into demonhood. The World Eater's librarians, those few who had never received the deadly butcher's nails implants, since the Fey power summoned by Lorgar from the warp, in an attempt to halt the Arisians' dark plans. The 19 remaining librarians harnessed their collective psychic powers to manifest a psychic entity known as the Communion, the gestalt consciousness of 19 psychic minds. In the midst of Lorgar's incantations, the Communion pulled the soul of the Primarch from his body. The two psychic entities confronted one another within the warp, locked in a deadly contest of wills, each convinced that they were the one responsible for saving Angron. But ultimately, the Communion failed, for Lorgar was just as powerful in the warp as he was in the material universe. As Angron's completed metamorphosis into a new demon prince, the demon Primarch turned his attention to the librarians, the creatures that had pained him for decades. The warriors that had made the butcher's nails sing and his brain bleed just for the sin of standing near them. Now they moved against his brother, hurling their foulness at Lorgar, who crouched one-handed and wounded down on his knees. The demon Primarch's rage killed the remaining librarians, each of them tasting a different doom. Angron killed the last of the librarians, expunging his legion of the weakness that had plagued his gene sons since his reunification with them a century earlier. The librarians of the World Eaters, the last fragment of the Warhounds within the 12th Legion, was no more. A fact which greatly pleased the Blood God Korn, who would not brook the existence of any psyker amongst his chosen servants. Lorgar had offered up the 12th Legion to the whims of the Blood God as his loyal servants. Now, there would only be blood, an ocean of blood, carried on a tide of eternal slaughter. Now, meanwhile, the gravely wounded Gilliman escaped from Nyceria, unable to face or even fully comprehend what both of his brothers had become through their corruption by the ruinous powers. The world leaders completed their purge of Nyceria until not one human life remained on the benighted world. Angron, now the very embodiment of the Blood God's eightfold path, shook the dust of the world from his feet and did not think of it again. Lorgar believed that he had saved his brother. In his mind, it was the only way, for he alone had sought to save Angron from the implants that were killing him by degrees. Only Lorgar had found a way to free Angron from an existence of unrivaled agony, and he alone had acted to save his tormented brother. Now, the Shadow Crusade could move on from Ultramar and rejoin Horus. The next target for the traitors would be Terra herself.
Quite right, Sekthar. Now, following the Shadow Crusade, Lorgar began to believe that Horus was too weak to lead the forces of chaos to victory over the Emperor. He was disgusted by Horus's refusal to submit to the power of the gods and had foreseen that Horus would ultimately lead the traitors to defeat on Terra. Lorgar became secretly committed to killing Horus and taking his place as the War Master of Chaos and the anointed champion of the Dark Gods. Lorgar made his move following Horus's fall at Beta Garmon, coming to Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, with one of his loyalist Stardays, the Dark Apostle Zardu-Leak. Though Horus was comatose, Lorgar agreed that the traitors needed to be assembled at Ulanor in preparation for the final drive on Terra. However, not all of the traitor Primarchs could be found, nor were they all obeying the summons. Thus, Lorgar proposed that Perturabo journey to find Angron while he sought out Fulgrim. Using an oracle named Actea as a guide, Lorgar, Leak, and a small force of word-bearers entered the webway in search of Fulgrim. They successfully navigated its treacherous corridors to enter the Eye of Terror, where they eventually entered the Realm of Chaos and soon found themselves before the Palace of Slanesh itself in the Dark Prince's realm. Within, they discovered Fulgrim and the demon Nakari engaging in debauchery. Fulgrim refused to leave his delights and returned to the war effort, forcing the two sides to battle. As Lorgar held off Fulgrim, Zardu-Leak uttered the true name of the newly ascended Emperor's Children, Demon Primarch. Leak had learned the name during a ritual Lorgar had conducted, but due to the total amnesia it would eventually curse the name's bearer with, he had given the information to the Dark Apostle instead. Fulgrim was bound to Leak's will by the name's utterance, and Lorgar now had a powerful pawn with which to slay Horus. After gathering the disparate Emperor's children together, the two legions arrived at Ulanor for Horus's muster. Horus had by this point recovered thanks to the sacrifice of his longtime equerry, Malogurst, and Lorgar revealed his plan to usurp the War Master. After sacrificing large numbers of mortal servants, Lorgar planned to unleash a psychic scream that would disorient Horus, then have Zayak order Fulgrim to attack. The word-bearers and Emperor's children orbiting Ulanor would finish off the Sons of Horus Legion, leaving Lorgar in total command of the traitors' war effort. However, Lorgar's coup quickly fell apart as Actea had already warned Horus of Lorgar's planned betrayal. Upon meeting Horus on Ulanor, Lorgar was immediately attacked before he could unleash his psychic assault, and Zardu-Leak betrayed Lorgar by freeing Fulgrim from his bindings instead of ordering him to attack. Lorgar was beaten mercilessly by Horus, who threw him his weapon and demanded he stand and fight. Lorgar refused to fight and instead expressed pity at the monstrosity Horus had become since his recovery. as Horus had gained an ever-shifting form with a maw of dark chaos energy at its core. Horus ordered Lorgar to leave his sight, pledging to kill him if he ever returned. The 5,000 word-bearers of the Chapter of the Unspeaking, under Lorgar's command, who had followed their dark apostle Zardu-Layak in his betrayal of Lorgar, would continue to serve Horus and campaign with him on Terra. Lorgar left for destinations unknown, proclaiming that Horus was doomed to failure due to his weakness. As the word-bearers battled across the Ultima Segmentum, those of the 17th Legion, led by Zardu-Layak, participated in the Siege of Terra, where Horus and his forces were repulsed and defeated after a 55 solar day siege. After the death of Horus, the 17th Legion ultimately took refuge within the warp rifts of the Eye of Terror and the Maelstrom, vast wounds in space where the Immaterium leaked into reality.
Eventually, the atrocities committed by the Word-Bearers led to Lorgar's ascension to demonhood. He became the equal of a god in the eyes of his legion, as he transformed into a demon primarch in his own right. It is said his birth scream as a demon prince of chaos, undivided, echoed across the Immaterium with triumphant vindication. His faith and devotion to chaos rewarded with immortality and unbridled power. He has since isolated himself within the Templum Inficio, on the demon world of the Sicarius, where he has remained for thousands of Terran years, forbidding anyone to interrupt his meditation, thus allowing the Word-Bearers to be taken over by the Dark Council of the Word-Bearers' most powerful Dark Apostles. Now, unlike many of the other traitor legions, the Word-Bearers have remained unified, if loosely organized, military force that has not split into separate warbands, all vying against one another for power and control, making them very dangerous if they ever mobilize. The main ruling body of the Word-Bearers is still the Dark Council, though the council is dominated by two major factions constantly striving against one another to dominate the Legion's future. One is led by the Dark Apostle and former First Chaplain, Erebus. The other by the Keeper of the Faith, Cor Pharaon. Now, Lorgar temporarily broke his isolation to aid his Word-Bearers against the monstrosity that was hunting them, but it was a decision that would haunt him for a millennia to come. You see, the Dark Apostle Kulta Ar sought to raise a huge edifice to the glory of his gene father Lorgar and his dark gods. But his work was derailed when something began killing the Word-Bearers under his command. His slaves told him that it was a shadow that rose up and tore the heretic Astartes to shreds. When the shadow finally came for Kulta Ar, he could not hope to fight it. So he took the Word-Bearer survivors and withdrew to Lorgar's sanctum, desperate for the Arisen's aid. When Lorgar emerged to face this dark thing that hunted his sons, he was surprised to discover it was Corvus Corax, his brother who nearly slayed him on Esteban V. Now, like I said before, Lorgar had become a demon prince at this point and was nothing like Corvus had faced during the Dropsite Massacre. He was a golden-skinned giant, wrapped in a cloak of throbbing chaos ruins and holding a vicious spiked mace. Yet, Lorgar hesitated when he saw his brother, not out of startled remembrance, but fear. You see, Corax had changed as well. Constant exposure to the energies of the warp within the Eye of Terror had stripped away the mortal facade the Emperor had bestowed upon his gene sons and revealed the true warp form consciousness that lived beneath the surface of every Primarch. Now a humanoid creature of blades and living shadow that could transform into enormous flocks of ravens, the being that was Corax hurled himself at Lorgar, trading immense blows that would fell a space marine many times over. The two demigods battled back and forth across the massive temple to the ruinous powers. But, as before, the Raven Lord gained the upper hand. Summoning a nimbus of power, Lorgar forced back his black-eyed tormentor and staggered into the Templum Inficio. At the tower in the heart of everything, Lorgar plunged into the hidden chamber and slammed the obsidian doors behind him. Screaming his rage and frustration, Korak swore to Lorgar that even if it took a millennia, he would hunt down the Arisen and tear him limb from limb. On the black door blocking the Raven Lord from his prey, 2 runes flared into being, spelling out a simple message: deny fate. Yet, it is rumored that Lorgar has overcome his fear of the Raven and escaped his fortress and has finally returned to lead his legion in the field at the close of the 41st millennium, following the birth of the Great Rift. It is said that he has been seen walking the mortal realms in terrible splendor, preaching the word of chaos at the head of a massive word-bearer army. Now, before we discuss our final thoughts on Lorgar, we have to discuss how Lorgar as a person was different than any of the other Primarchs.
Do we really have to?
Yes, we do. If we want to understand why Lorgar is who he is.
Fine, but make it quick.
Oh yes, most definitely. Now, it is said by Sorat Chur, a wordbearer's captain who took part in the Battle of Kulth, who confided in his friend Honrus Lucille of the Ultramarines, that Lorgar had been a burden to his own legion for many Terran years. While Lorgar was every bit as brilliant and charismatic as the other Primarchs, he could also be moody and mercurial. Rabute Gilliman echoed this negative assessment of his brother after a brief conversation with Lorgar when he said, "He's so changeable. He is so prone to extremes, eager to please, so quick to take offense. He's so keen to be your best friend, and then, the slightest hint of insult, he's angry with you. Furious, offended, like a child." Even after suffering the worst effects of the word-bearer's treason on Kulth, Gilliman said that he felt his brother's pain and believed that Lorgar had been manipulated by forces beyond his control. However, after the Dropsite massacre and his duel with Korax, it was said that those around him, including Magnus, Horus, and Gilliman, that Lorgar had changed and become a different person. Dubbing himself the Minister of Chaos Absolute, became more accepting of the necessity for war and violence, which we actually talked about quite a bit. Lorgar began to create his own grand stratagems and practice the arts of manipulation. His growing closeness to the Chaos Gods granted him new power to enhance his once subpar combat performance, and his psychic mastery of the warp rapidly outpaced that of Erebus and Kor Pharon, who began to realize they could no longer control him through the use of their emotional manipulations. Lorgar was bitter over his existence as a Primarch, believing himself to be a soldier bred for nothing but war. As Lorgar had always dedicated himself to exploring the true nature of the universe and building a society that would embody these universal truths, Lorgar never mastered the arts of combat and military strategy like his brothers, and even looked down on the acts of conquest. Because of his interests in aspects of human existence beyond warfare, Lorgar often found solace with his brother Magnus the Red, whose personality and mindset most closely resembled his own. Much like Magnus, Lorgar ultimately developed his psychic abilities in preference to his purely physical prowess. Magnus once criticized Lorgar for being selfless, and later, the emissary of the Chaos Gods during the pilgrimage of Lorgar would say he had been chosen by Chaos to serve as its mortal representative because of his capacity for putting aside his own ego in the pursuit of a greater cause. Now, while most of who served the Dark Gods did so for power or other selfish interests, Lorgar entered their service as a true idealist who only wanted the best for mankind and believed the future could only be found in an embrace of chaos. So, before we leave, what are your final thoughts on Lorgar, the guy who systematically destroyed the Imperium of mankind? It created the Ecclesiarchy and continues today to be the righteous zealot of the ruinous powers, or unrighteous, depending on who you're talking to.
Pretty much, other than the fact that he's a horrible person, which we've kind of established.
Well, depends on what you mean by horrible. What do you mean by horrible? I don't think we really
The
established
fact that he started the Horus Heresy.
Okay.
That's a horrible thing to do, you know. I mean,
depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to Korn, he did awesome. But yes, to the Imperium, anyways, he's considered a villain, a traitor, but there's more to him than that. I think we really delved into that quite a bit on this.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not Erebus. Erebus just straight up just hates everything and everyone and just wants power, and that's why he keeps stabbing people in the back and just being a dick. Lorgar was designed this way, first off, by Cor Ferron to be manipulated,
Right.
and eventually was manipulated into serving the Chaos Gods. And then he just kind of went with that and ran. I mean, to think, anyways, what would have happened, anyways, if the Emperor, ironically, had taken more of the approach that Rogel Dorn did with Sigismund. So remember, anyways, first off, anyways, Sigismund and Rogel Dorn, anyways, had some problems because Sigismund eventually admitted to Rogel Dorn that he thought that the Emperor was a god, right? And that caused a huge rift until the Siege of Terra. And they kind of eventually, anyways, at that point, anyways, kind of see eye to eye a little bit more. And then he gives Sigismund, anyways, his own legion, chapter, and says, "Go ahead and do what you do." And he knew Sigismund thought, anyways, of the Emperor as a god, so he's just like, "Okay, yeah, go for it." And they've become the most zealous, the most probably one of the greatest chapters of Astartes out there, anyways, when it comes to expanding the empire.
Well, so the fact that they have to keep going over the same place again and again and again because
Other people have to worry about that. They normally don't, but and when they do, they just kind of bomb the place because they're like, "Well, we gave you a shot." But to me, anyways. So here's the thing, anyways, is that it would have been interesting if the Emperor had done the same thing Rogel Dorn did with Sigismund by because he gave him, a chapter and said, "Just you be you," and Sigismund said, "Right, we're going to be the Black Templars." If the Emperor had done the same thing with Lorgar, I wonder what would have happened.
Well, he did basically do the same thing.
Well, except for that whole aspect, he ended up chastising him anyways for
Well,
him,
up until the chastisement, he did exactly the same thing.
Yeah, but then he
Here's
went.
your legion.
It was kind of like it would kind of been like, anyways, if Lorgar came back, anyways, 100 years later, anyways, and kicked Rogel Dorn or Sigismund in the teeth, and then beat him in front of the Black Templars, saying, "You idiot! But I've always believed this, and you knew that. I don't care." I mean, if the Emperor, anyways, because like I said, Rogel Dorn knew this about Sigismund going in. He still gave him a chapter and said, "You be you." And it wasn't oh, by the way, you have to come back anyways to believe what I think. He just said, "You be you."
Yeah.
You just kind of let him run. I mean, something that's not really talked about very much anyways, but when Lorgar was part of the Great Crusade before Monarchia, I mean, all of those worlds anyways, every last man on that planet, every last man, woman, child on that planet would have died for the Emperor.
Right.
I mean, he created zealots. I mean, he created anyways, while he might have been slower than everybody else, the thing is that all the people that he left behind, they wouldn't have done anyways what happens, like you said, anyways, the Black Templars that just come in, hit the Great Crusade, and then leave. And then you have all these rebellions and stuff that take place behind them because
they didn't really come back with another crusade.
Yeah, they didn't really change anything. Lorgar was actually doing that. So, like I said before, anyways, there's three parts of history where I look at the Emperor and I go, "You done did something stupid." And this is one of them, with the whole thing with Monarchia and not actually, trying to even deal with Lorgar. And, this is probably the most important one because of that, the whole Imperium fell. It died. Well, actually, it's not dead. Now it's just a rotting corpse that just sits there. But
I wonder how things would have changed if the Emperor had killed Corferon.
there's so many things he could have done.
If he had done that, okay, this is what I feel about it. He's one of the people who's saying this, right? Okay, now let's move on. He isn't one of my Astartes.
Come here.
He's not one of my Astartes.
There's so many things, anyways, that could have been done that just never were. And these are events, anyways, that take place outside of Lorgar. Lorgar, in and of himself, anyways. I mean, like, for instance, like you said, anyways, in the last Fox that we did, or earlier, anyways, if Corferon hadn't killed the guy that actually found him, was raising him, who knows what would have happened? This guy could have been very much
Actually,
like
you're the one who said that, but
well, no, you said he could have been. He could have ended up like Vulcan. He very well could have been. I mean, Vulcan, both Vulcan and him, anyways, they're both very empathetic towards humanity. I mean, now it's very different, anyways, in the way that they think of humanity. But I mean, at the time, anyways, both of them, anyways, had a very empathetic way of looking at humanity, and they wanted to look over humanity, rule over humanity, and be benevolent. But I mean, like I said, or like you said, anyways, this is like if that guy hadn't died, what would have happened to Lorgar? I mean, quite frankly, it really roots down to Corferon turning him into somebody, anyways, that is constantly seeking approval for particular people, anyways, that are constantly manipulating him into doing what they want him to do. And he ends up getting a little bit of reprieve when the Emperor shows up, a little bit. But the Emperor, anyways, just kind of leaves him to his own devices instead of actually, taking a step in as being, I don't know, a bloody leader and leading. But it's just, once you start with Corferon, anyways, just and with nobody is the support for Lorgar, anyways, to help him back or make him rethink things or anything along those lines, anyways, it's just an end game at that point.
Right.
He's a corrupted tool that is going to be constantly used against the Imperium or towards, anyways, whatever somebody else wants. And when we get to the pilgrimage, and it's just, he's literally looking for someone to tell him what to do. And yeah, and the rest is kind of history. I'm kind of interested to see what's going to happen, though, when he actually, it's rumored right now, but when he actually re-enters the Materium, what him and his word bearers are going to do, because this is going to be something completely different that we haven't seen. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be bloody. But on that note, we are out of time for today. Thank you guys for sticking around and listening to us. I know we covered a ton, but like we said, anyways, kind of the beginning of this, anyways, to know the decaying carcass of the Imperium is to know Lorgar. But join us next week when we try to figure out who is worse, Erebus or Corferon.
Well, they both really suck.
Yes, they do. But who sucks worse?
I really don't care personally. My obvious bet is on Erebus, but I suppose we'll figure it out next week.
True.
But if you enjoyed our little show, could you please be so kind as to push that subscribe, like, or follow button? And if you wish to help us expand our work on 40K Lore, by all means, support us by joining our membership program on our YouTube channel, Tales of Ashraka.
Yes. And most importantly, though, have a great day. And as always,
until next time, this is Ekthar
and Yuxin
signing off.
Well, your brothers in arms now, on your shoulders you pull. All humanity forward till your time is paid in full. Where humanity's finest, young Imperium son. Show them all where the line is now until the day is won. Hold your head, I'm not so bodies